Last Christmas morning, I put on my snow boots, zipped up my thickest winter coat, and held the gift Ivy had spent all year making, only to be pushed away from the door of the house I had once co-signed the loan for with my son. She didn't yell, she didn't scold me. She said just one sentence, "You shouldn't come anymore." And me, I just stood there, in the snow. The sound of distant church bells mingling with the sound of my own heart shattering into pieces too small to make a sound. If one day your own grandchild was taught to believe that Grandma doesn't love you anymore, if one Christmas morning the family door opened only to push you back out into the cold, what would you do? Leave a comment, because I'm about to tell you everything that happened. This isn't a made-up story. This is my story. I don't know how a 68-year-old woman is supposed to react when she's rejected by her own flesh and blood. As for me that day, I didn't scream. I didn't knock again. I didn't call out anyone's name. I just stood there. My hands were stiff inside my thin velvet gloves, my wrists freezing from the wind that slipped through the collar of my coat. I tried to hold a smile, even though my heart had already fallen out of winter and into an empty void I couldn't name. In my hands was a hardcover scrapbook. Ivy had drawn 1 page a week for the entire year. From the first week of January, when she drew me holding her by a snow-covered window, to the most recent week, the two of us folding paper cranes in the hospital. Every drawing was captioned with the same shaky pencil strokes, "I love you, Grandma." I brought it today because Ivy had told me the last page is for Christmas. "You keep it, Grandma. I want to give it to you myself. I remember last Christmas." She stood on a wooden stool wearing an oversized apron, trying to roll gingerbread dough without spilling flour on the floor. I held her little hands in mine, laughing, teaching her how to use the cookie cutter so the gingerbread man wouldn't lose a leg. Afterward, we stuck snowflake decals on the glass panes. When we were done, she sat down with a sigh and said, "You are my Christmas Grandma." And yet 1 year later, the door didn't open to embrace me like it used to. It opened to block my way. Delilah stood there, silk bathrobe, unbrushed hair, no makeup. But what sent a chill down my spine wasn't her appearance, it was her eyes. She looked at me like I was a mailman who'd delivered a package to the wrong address. A stranger. Unnecessary. There was no "Hi, Mom," no "Merry Christmas," just distance. I could hear Ivy's voice from inside. "Is that Grandma? Mommy? Is it Grandma Marla?" Her voice was muffled by a wall, or by an adult. I tilted my head, trying to see inside, but Delilah shifted her shoulder to block my view. She pulled her robe tighter, as if afraid I might do something inappropriate. I wasn't angry or ashamed. I just felt something inside me break like a dish falling from a high shelf that no one hears shatter. I held out the scrapbook with both hands neatly. "Ivy drew in this all year. I was hoping you could give it to her." Delilah didn't take it. She just glanced at it like it was a worthless souvenir. "Thank you. But from now on, Ivy will have a different kind of Christmas." Then she added, "You shouldn't come anymore." I don't remember if I nodded or just stood there in silence, but I left still clutching the scrapbook. The wind whipped harder as I turned to walk away. It flipped open the first page of the album to the drawing of Ivy and me, sitting under the Christmas tree, a roaring fire glowing in the hearth behind us, the air smelling of baking cookies. I didn't cry, not in front of that door. I just walked. Each step on the snow made a crunching sound like the cracking of my own heart. I opened my car door, placed the album on the passenger seat, and closed it. When I looked back one last time through the windshield, I could see the Christmas lights still twinkling in the first floor window, the exact spot where I had hung them last year. No one came out to watch me leave. No one called my name. There was just a beautifully lit tree in a house that no longer had room for me. I'll tell you the rest. But before I do, I have to ask you honestly, if you were me that morning, would you have knocked one more time I got home after dark and didn't turn on the lights? The key made a dry scraping sound in the lock. A damp, cold air wafted out as soon as the door opened. I didn't take off my coat or my gloves. I walked straight to the old sofa where I read every evening. The back of my coat was still damp with melted snow sticking to the fabric of the couch, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. It wasn't the chill from outside that numbed me, but the hollowness in my chest. It had been quietly siphoning the warmth from my body since that door closed. I opened a half-finished bottle of Merlot from last week and poured a small glass, not because I wanted to get drunk. I just needed something to fill the silence. I turned on the old radio in the kitchen to a Christmas station. Frank Sinatra's voice crooned weakly through the crackling speaker, "Have yourself a merry little Christmas," but I turned it off. I couldn't stand the misplaced cheer. I placed Ivy's album on my lap, my hand stroking each page as if I were touching a memory. From January to December, each page was a piece of me that was left in her. I stopped at March, where Ivy had drawn us folding paper cranes in the hospital. That page made my throat tighten the most. That was the day my elderly neighbor passed away. Ivy had asked me, "Grandma, where do people go when they die?" And I told her, "They become paper cranes if we remember them long enough." Ivy folded 10 of them and taped them all over my wall, so they don't forget the way back she'd said. I closed the album, stood up, and opened my laptop, intending to print a few old photos to paste onto the final page. I wanted to complete it, even if Delilah wouldn't accept it, even if no one was sharing my Christmas table this year. The laptop was slow, taking nearly 3 minutes to open my email. I clicked on the bank notifications folder looking for an old purchase receipt, but one subject line made my eyes freeze. "Congratulations on completing the refinancing of property number 4957. Transaction confirmation for June." I clicked on it. The content was simple. The refinancing was successfully completed. Loan terms were changed, and the first disbursement was made on June 12th. The co-signer's name, Marla Grafton. The signature below the name was mine, or rather it looked like mine. I froze. I opened my calendar. June 12th. I remembered it vividly. Was the day I was in the hospital after a fall in my kitchen. I hadn't been to any bank, much less signed any papers. My heart pounded as if someone had just poured ice water down my back. I stood up, nearly stumbling, and walked into the bedroom to pull out the file box from my drawer. I still had the original loan documents from 3 years ago, along with utility bills and insurance statements. I wasn't the type to throw away important papers. It took me almost 10 minutes to find the new file. Inside was a mortgage refinancing agreement I had never seen before. The paper was thin and white, the ink fresh, complete with a transaction code and contract number. I looked at the line, co-borrower's signature, Marla Grafton. Then I looked at the signature. At first glance, it did look like mine. The long stroke, the rightward slant, even the little flourish on the G that I'd been using since my teaching days. But I knew this was not my handwriting. The flourish lacked depth. The stroke was a little unsteady, and it was missing the firm pressure at the end of the line that my real signature had. I stared at it, closing my eyes and opening them again. It was still the same. Someone had forged my signature. I set the paper down on the table. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a sense of violation, a quiet, discreet, and calculated violation. 3 faces flashed in my mind. Delilah, with her indifferent eyes and tightly pressed lips. Owen, my son, who once texted me, "It's just paperwork, Mom, don't overthink it." And Ivy, the only person in that house who still held my image in her drawings. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. But I, more than anyone, knew my own signature. I had taught nearly 30 generations of students how to write their names with love and precision. I couldn't be fooled by such a weak imitation. I sank into a chair, my hand still resting on the edge of the file. The house was so quiet I could hear the second hand of the wall clock ticking. I didn't cry, I didn't panic, but I felt as if someone had silently bent a part of my trust deliberately. Closing scene. I folded the file, setting it aside. Sitting in the dim light from the kitchen, I looked again at the forged signature. It was like looking directly into a silent betrayal. There was no need for shouting, no need for a slap in the face. All it took was one crooked line of ink, a line that may have changed the course of an entire family. I sat for a long time after discovering the forged signature doing nothing. Not speaking, not crying, not calling anyone. The light from the kitchen bulb cast a slanted glow across the table, illuminating the messy pile of papers. Only one question repeated in my head like a monotonous drumbeat. Why me? At that moment, I didn't know where to begin. All I knew was that I needed someone who understood laws, documents, and me. The first person who came to mind was Wilma. We went to high school together over 40 years ago. She'd worked as an accountant for a local bank for nearly 3 decades, the kind of person who kept every receipt, every bill, all color-coded and filed away. We used to be close, but time distance and life had a way of pulling people in different directions. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my old contacts. Wilma still had a landline. I called. After 2 rings, a voice answered, "Duh. Hello." I hesitated for a second, then said, "Wilma, it's me, Marla." A brief silence. Then she let out a familiar throaty laugh. "Good heavens, you haven't called me in 3 years. So I know this has to be big." I couldn't laugh with her. I just replied softly, "I need the eyes of someone who's read hundreds of signatures." Wilma didn't ask any more questions. She just said, "Bring the papers. I'll put on water for cinnamon tea." Wilma's house was at the end of a quiet street halfway up a hill with a half-painted white picket fence and a weathered wooden bench I'd sat on years ago. The door opened as I parked, as if she'd been waiting. Inside, the smell of cinnamon, dried orange peel, and a hint of vanilla made me feel like I'd stepped back into the winters of my youth. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Some friendships don't require demonstration. I sat down at her kitchen table where the warm yellow light shone on the scratched old wood. She poured tea into a mug and sat across from me. No small talk, no feigned surprise. I pulled the stack of papers from my bag and carefully spread them out. The refinancing agreement, the scan from the bank email, and the original contract from 3 years ago. Wilma put on her glasses, adjusted the reading lamp, and leaned in. Her hands were thin with blue veins, but her movements were decisive and precise, like someone who had spent a lifetime handling numbers and stamps. She didn't say anything for the first 5 minutes, just scanned, tracing each word, each stroke of ink. When she finally looked up, her voice was very soft. "Marla, this isn't your signature, and if I remember correctly, you were still at St. John's Hospital on June 12th. I nodded, my voice hoarse. "You visited me at 3 o'clock that afternoon." She nodded. Then she spoke slowly, enunciating each word. "If this is verified, the person who did this has committed a felony. This is identity theft in a legal financial transaction." I heard her, but all I could register was the soft clicking of the heater. Wilma leaned in again. She pulled a document from a drawer, the old mortgage agreement I had signed, the one she had helped me with. She placed the 2 signatures side by side. "Look here, the initial loop on your M is always higher than the second. This one is the opposite. And here the G isn't fully closed, and the final stroke cuts off short." I didn't know if I should feel angry or grateful. I just felt empty. Wilma continued, her voice steady. "I once had a client, also a widow living alone. Her daughter-in-law forged her signature to take out a $200,000 loan for an investment. It only came to light when the investment went bust. She had to sell her house and move out of state." I let out a long breath. Wilma pursed her lips. "You're not there yet. But don't let it go any further. My advice, report it to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, first. Then if you have to take legal action." She made me a copy of my original signature, folded it carefully, and clipped it to the file. I thanked her, with all the words I hadn't said in years. Before I left, she looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "You know what makes me the saddest?" I turned back. She continued. "It's women like us who start to think we don't matter anymore. And because we think that we let other people use our names without even asking." When I got home, I turned on the kitchen light, made a cup of peppermint tea, and sat down at the table. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. But something had changed. It was as if I had just reclaimed a piece of my dignity that had been stolen not with noise or blood, but with ink and paper that carried the weight of a lifetime of trust. I walked over to the bookshelf and took down Ivy's scrapbook. On the back cover, I stuck a sticky note. It had just 4 words, "No more silence." It wasn't written for anyone else. It was for me. A silent vow. If anyone thought I would stay quiet, they should know I had lived a quiet life, but I was never a quitter. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. The sky was overcast and the wind rustled the curtains. I was sitting in the kitchen holding a cup of long, cold tea I hadn't touched. The landline rang its bell, a little off-key from age, but the sound was clear. I picked it up. On the other end was a woman's voice, familiar, but it took me a moment to place it. "Mrs. Grafton, it's Lucille." I blinked. Lucille, the teacher's assistant from Ivy's class. We'd sat next to each other at parent-teacher conferences. We once baked cookies together for a school fundraiser. I even taught her my recipe for pumpkin cream cheese muffins. "Hello, Lucille. It's been a while." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue, but I think you should know something. Maybe it's not my place, but I just can't let it go." I sat up straighter. "Can you meet me in the parking lot behind the Target, our old spot? It won't take long." Half an hour later, I was parked in the furthest corner of the lot near a few bare maple trees. It was cold. I had to shove my hands deep into my coat pockets. Lucille arrived soon after, walking from the end of the street, her hair in a neat bun, wearing a dark fleece jacket. When she saw me, she didn't waste time on greetings. She just glanced around, then pulled a small USB drive from her purse and pressed it into my hand. "I shouldn't have this," she said, her voice tense. It was on Ivy's little voice recorder. I'm not even sure who turned it on or who recorded it. But Ivy heard it, and I think you should hear it too. I clutched the small drive. My heart was beating so hard I could feel the pulse vibrating in my wrist. "Thank you," he said, not knowing what else to say. "Ivy's been so quiet lately, and since that day she hasn't drawn anything. Every time I ask about you, she smiles, but there's no light in her eyes anymore." Lucille gave my shoulder a quick squeeze, then walked away. She didn't ask what I would do with the recording, didn't tell me to be careful. She just left in silence, as if she had just placed a secret heavy enough to crack bone into my hands. I went home, took out my laptop, and plugged in the USB. A single file appeared on the screen. Ivy Voice Rec 1211, Wave. I clicked play. The first few seconds were just rustling sounds, probably Ivy fiddling with the device. Then her voice came through small, almost a whisper. "Mommy, does Grandma Marla not love me anymore?" Silence. "Mommy," then Delilah's voice, low, clear, and unmistakable. "She left you, sweetie. She's busy living her own life now. Don't think about it, okay?" I paused the recording. I couldn't listen to any more, but I couldn't turn it off either. I sat there, not blinking, my hands limp in my lap. I could still hear Ivy's question echoing in my ears, a question no child should ever have to ask. "Does Grandma Marla not love me anymore?" I stood up and walked into the living room. I picked up the scrapbook she had made for me. I opened it, each page a breath from the past year. The page from March, from June, from August. Then I stopped at the most recent one, a drawing that had once made me smile. Not anymore. Ivy had drawn herself standing inside by the window, a small blue figure with a sad face. Outside was the snow and a human silhouette, colorless, just a faded pencil outline walking away. No face, no name, no one calling out. Just distance. I turned on the desk lamp and pulled out a chair. I placed the scrapbook on the wooden surface next to a blank notebook. I intended to write something, anything to get it out. But my hand remained still on the drawing, on Ivy's face, on the eyes of a child whose truth was being twisted by an adult. I had been angry at being cut out of my son's life, angry at being erased from Christmas, angry that my signature had been forged, but that anger was nothing compared to the pain of realizing that little girl believed her grandmother didn't want her anymore. I had thought about taking the forgery to court. I had thought about suing, about making a scene, but now I wasn't so sure, because none of this was about money or a house anymore. It was about a child being led astray by words that were sickeningly sweet. I didn't write anything, I just sat there. My hand rested on the drawing on the shaky outline of Ivy's grandmother standing outside the door again. Not because she wanted to be, but because someone was determined to keep her there. I stared at the legal file for most of the next morning. The papers were flat and white, but they felt like cold metal against my skin. I had planned to call a lawyer. I had a whole strategy in my head for confrontation, presentation, and litigation. But then I asked myself, would winning a lawsuit make Ivy trust me again? I folded the file. I didn't rip it up. I didn't feel the need to destroy it. I just tied it with a red ribbon, the kind I used to use for Christmas gifts, and placed it on top of my bookshelf, above a stack of old novels by Steinbeck and Morrison. A legal battle can't erase a lie from a child's heart, I whispered to myself, as if talking to my younger self, the one who believed justice was swift, sharp, and straight as a razor's edge. But now I knew some truths don't need to be won. They just need to be written in the right place. I called June, the young journalist who had once been my student in a high school art class. She had a column in the local online journal called Countercurrents, where she wrote about complex family dynamics. I asked her to meet me for coffee. June arrived right on time. The same as ever, gray wool coat hair in a loose bun, a notebook in one hand and a black felt-tip pen in the other. As soon as she sat down, she said, "You taught me how to use watercolors to express emotion. Now I use words to do the same thing." I smiled but didn't reply. I just opened my bag and pulled out each piece of the story. I didn't embellish, I didn't cast blame, I didn't create a melodrama. I just told the truth piece by piece, detail by detail. She didn't interrupt or overreact, she just listened. I gave her the USB with the recording. June put on her headphones and sat perfectly still until it was over. When she took them off, her eyes were a little red. She didn't wipe them or look away. She just said quietly, "Are you afraid of retaliation? I know a lot of people, especially at your age, choose silence because they're afraid of being resented by their children." I looked straight into the eyes of the girl I once taught. My voice was calm. "I'm only afraid that Ivy will grow up and not remember what my face looks like." June nodded. "That's enough." We sat for nearly another hour. June wrote down every detail. I gave her a copy of the scrapbook. In it was the page where Ivy had drawn me, reading a book while she slept with her head in my lap, an image that never actually happened. But Ivy had told me, when she gave it to me, I wish it would one day. June touched the edge of the page. Then she said, "Your granddaughter wasn't just drawing memories. She was drawing what she was losing." That sentence made me pause. When June stood up to leave, placing all the documents in her bag, she said one last thing. "I can't promise the article will change anyone, but I promise it won't let you be erased." I watched her leave the coffee shop. No one noticed. Just a young woman leaving with an old leather bag. But I knew that inside that bag were pieces of my voice pages of drawings, strokes of ink, and everything that had been taken from me, now on its way back into the world. Closing scene. I sat there for a while longer alone. For the first time in a week, my eyes didn't sting with tears. I placed both hands on the open scrapbook on the table. In my heart, I whispered, I don't need to win a lawsuit. I just need the truth to be written in its rightful place. I don't know exactly when the article was published. I don't have social media accounts, I don't use Twitter, and I no longer have the patience to follow the news like I did when I was younger. I only knew. That morning, as I poured my first cup of coffee and turned on the radio out of habit, the announcer read a quote that made me drop my spoon. This Christmas, Ivy didn't ask, "Where's Santa?" she asked. "Does Grandma Marla still love me?" I stood frozen in my kitchen. My heart, which already knew the contents of the article, was still squeezed tight by that sentence. I braced my hands on the counter, my breath catching in my throat, not from fear, but from emotion. No one had called me beforehand. No one told me the article was live. But I knew the truth was out in the open. June had titled the article "The Grandmother Erased from the Drawing." It appeared in her Countercurrents series, a collection of stories exposing relationships fractured by manipulation, control, and silence. The first illustration was Ivy's drawing, the one I'd never forget, of me standing in the snow outside their house, while inside a lit Christmas tree and a tiny Ivy stood at the window. The article linked back to June's personal page, which had over 100,000 followers. And as if someone had flipped a switch, the wave hit. Within hours, hundreds of shares appeared. Most were from elderly people, grandparents, and parents who had been cut off by their children. One person commented, "I thought I was the only one whose grandchildren were told, 'Grandma moved away because she doesn't love you anymore.'" Another wrote, "No one should be able to erase the grandmother who held their grandchild through countless fevers, just because she no longer fits the new family plan." I read every comment, not to find vindication, but to know that I wasn't alone, and Ivy wasn't either. Delilah did the first thing anyone in her situation would do. She locked her social media accounts. I heard from Wilma, my friend, who still followed the local community groups, that Delilah's old posts about strong parenting methods had vanished. But then, like a pair of scissors turning back on themselves, a neighbor posted a video clip filmed in their backyard from a few weeks prior. In the clip, Delilah was snapping at Ivy. "Did you hear me? She is not our family anymore. Don't say her name again, Ivy." The clip was reshared with the caption, "Is this how we teach children about family?" A few days later, I received a text from Lucille, Ivy's former teacher's assistant. She sent just one photo, a single sheet of A4 paper drawn with wax crayons. In the middle, Ivy was sitting and playing in the schoolyard. In the sky there was a large cloud, and I was drawn inside it. I had silver hair and was smiling down. Below it, in short, uneven letters, was a caption, "Grandma Marla can still see me playing." I stared at the picture for a long time. I printed it out. I taped it to my refrigerator next to the very first drawing. I thought about her small hands drawing an image of me, no longer there, but still watching. I didn't know if she understood everything that was happening, but I knew Ivy was trying to find me again in her imagination, in her drawings, in her small questions. Lucille also sent one more text. "Today, Ivy asked Owen, 'Is Grandma really dead, Daddy?' I don't know what Owen said, but he cried afterward. I wasn't expecting anyone to come to my house that Saturday afternoon. A cold rain had just started to fall, and clouds as thick as gray flour were settling over the neighborhood. I was peeling an apple, the warm core still in my palm, when I heard a knock at the door, not loud, but somehow hesitant. I opened it and saw Owen, my son, standing there. I almost didn't recognize him. Faded hoodie, wrinkled jeans, a stubbled chin, and puffy, bloodshot eyes that looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He stood slightly to the side as if he didn't dare place both feet on his mother's porch. I didn't say anything. I just pushed the door open a little wider. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. I didn't answer right away. I just turned and walked toward the kitchen, leaving the door open behind me. He understood quietly, stepping inside and sitting down in the wooden chair at the dining table, the same chair he used to sit in as a boy, his feet dangling high above the floor. I placed a mug of hot tea in front of him. No questions, no accusations. I just sat down across from him. Owen looked around as if searching for something, then lowered his head. I know you saw the contract. You know, don't you?" I nodded. He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. "Delilah did it. She showed me the papers after she'd already signed them. I saw your signature, and I knew it wasn't right. And you said nothing. I stated my voice even. I thought if I just stayed quiet, everything would be okay. I was afraid Delilah would leave, afraid of losing Ivy." I looked at him for a long time. Then I asked this slowly, "And what about me?" "Owen, was I ever part of that okay?" He started to cry. Not sobbing, not with shaking shoulders, but a silent cry. Tears fell onto his hands, and he didn't wipe them away, as if letting them wash everything away. "When I was little, I always thought you were the strongest person in the world. You could fix anything, answer any question. You were the first person I told when I won the essay contest. And now I'm the one who made you a joke," he breathed out. I didn't cry, maybe because my tears had run dry long ago. But I felt a part of my heart soften. Not forgiveness, not yet, but an understanding that he was still my son. Clumsy and weak, but still mine. I stood up, walked to the bookshelf, and took out the first scrapbook Ivy had ever made, the one I had kept like a piece of my heart. I opened it to the last page, the one that had never been finished. Placing it on the table, I pushed it gently toward Owen. "Help me finish this page." He touched the edge of the paper and nodded, speechless. A week later, Owen returned carrying a small gift wrapped in newspaper. I opened it. It was a blue child-proof phone with only one button programmed to call a single number mine. "Ivy doesn't know yet," Owen said. "I want her to be the one to call you, when she's ready, with no one interfering." I held the phone in my hand like it was a fragile lifeline in a dark ocean. I nodded. That evening, as I was folding towels in the living room, the phone rang. The ring was short and tinny like a toy. I looked at the screen, no name, no number, just the word Ivy. I answered, taking a deep breath. Her voice came through small and trembling. "Grandma, do you still remember me?" I swallowed the lump in my throat, clutching the phone as if I were afraid her voice would disappear. "I remember you every single day, Ivy. I'm right there with you every time you draw." A short pause. Then Ivy said more clearly, "Then I'll draw you again. I'll draw you really, really big, so you're not hidden anymore." I sat there holding the phone to my cheek, my heart feeling like it had just heard an old song whose melody I had forgotten. Ivy hadn't said "I miss you" or "I love you," but that sentence was enough. Closing scene, I opened the scrapbook and took out a fresh blank page. In the corner I wrote, "Next time Ivy will draw her grandma. Not hidden, not on the outside, not blurry anymore." Then I smiled. A small smile, but a real one. Owen's new place was at the end of Ashwood Drive in a quiet but aging apartment complex. The 3-story building had peeling beige paint, a slightly rusted outdoor staircase, and a few potholes in the parking lot. But no one bothered anyone. And for us at that time, a place quiet enough to start over was all that mattered. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, a small living room, an L-shaped kitchen, and a window overlooking the shared lawn between the buildings. No balcony, no fireplace, no Christmas tree. But it had its own key, a sturdy lock, and enough space for Ivy and me to lay down a new rug and start again with blank pages. Owen asked me to stay for a few weeks while he worked and sorted out his custody schedule with Ivy. I didn't refuse, not because I wanted to interfere, but because that child needed a steady rhythm to redraw the lines that had been cut short. The very first day, Ivy ran through the apartment like she'd been set free in an open field. She used tape to hang her drawings all over the empty walls, one of the two of us under a purple umbrella in the rain. My favorite, another of the three of us, me, Ivy, and Owen, sitting on the small sofa we hadn't had time to reupholster. Ivy said, "Our sofa is a little ugly, but it feels safe to sit on." I turned the smaller bedroom into a space for her and me to share at night. We bought a used wooden bunk bed from Craigslist. Ivy slept on top, and I took the bottom. She hung a little card from the side of her bed that read, "Grandma. Marla isn't gone anymore." On our second night there, we sat in the living room folding paper cranes. The three of us under the dim yellow light, our hands sticky with glue and colored paper. As she folded, Ivy said, "These cranes will fly to people who don't have a grandma." I asked why people who don't have a grandma. She answered very seriously, "Because the ones who do are already happy. The ones who don't need a little extra magic." We made 23 of them. We taped them into a long string and hung it next to the dining table, right under the old flickering fluorescent light. A few days later, Ivy announced she was making a new album. She called it Grandma Didn't Disappear. This time she didn't use a pre-made hardcover, but took colored cardstock, cut the edges with zigzag scissors, and glued on a little note with a lavender print. On the cover, she added the first selfie the two of us had taken in months. My eyes were half closed from the sun while she was grinning from ear to ear, her cheeks as plump as sweet rolls. I asked Ivy, "What do you want to redraw?" She tilted her head. "Not redraw. Draw next." That evening, while I was folding a blanket, I saw Ivy sitting at her small table with a blue crayon in her hand, completely silent. After nearly 10 minutes, she spoke. "Grandma, what is it, sweetie? If I don't believe Mommy anymore, is that bad?" I froze. Not because of the question, but because of the look in her eyes. Eyes that were searching for a way out of a maze of adult words she didn't fully understand but knew deep down were wrong. I sat down beside her and put my hand on her shoulder. "Not believing a lie doesn't make you a bad person, Ivy. It just makes you stronger." She didn't answer. She just leaned against me, her small shoulders relaxing, her breathing steady. After she fell asleep, I took out the old scrapbook, the one that had been rejected at Delilah's door. The last page was still blank. I had kept it that way like a silent prayer. That night I opened a drawer and took out my red ink pen, the one I only used for signing important letters. I wrote, "The last page was never the end. It was the first page of a new book." I closed the album. There was no music, no twinkling lights, but the air in the apartment at that moment felt as light as a spring breeze. Closing scene. I stood up, turned off the light, and walked down the small hallway to the bedroom. On the wall, Ivy had taped up a new drawing, she and I sitting under an apple tree in full bloom. Beneath the drawing in pencil was a caption, "My grandma, not hidden anymore." I was slicing an apple in the kitchen when Owen walked in, phone in hand, his face full of hesitation. "Mom, do you have a minute?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I nodded, wiped my hands on a kitchen towel, and pulled out a chair. Owen placed his phone on the table, pressed play on a recording, and pushed it gently toward me. "It's a voicemail from Delilah. She sent it last night." I said nothing. I just sat up straight, my hands folded in my lap. Delilah's voice came on, not loud, but more tired and shaky than I had ever heard it. I know I crossed a line. I never thought it would go this far. I'm scared. I'm scared Ivy will hate me forever. I'm not a bad person, Owen. I felt pushed out like I was losing control. I want to see your mom, not to argue, just to clear the air, to understand each other again. The voicemail ended with a long sigh. A silence stretched until the phone stopped playing. I looked at Owen. He didn't say anything, didn't press me. I stood up, poured myself a glass of cold tea, took a sip, and set it down. Does she want to clear the air, or clear her name with the public? I asked gently, as if asking myself more than needing an answer. Owen lowered his head. He didn't deny it. He didn't make excuses. I didn't reply to Delilah. No text back, no call, no letter. I didn't choose silence out of hatred. I chose silence because I had already said everything I needed to say by living my life without needing her to validate my worth. The next day, as I was watering the small orchid on my windowsill, Ivy brought me a new drawing. "Look, Grandma." "I just finished," she said. I took it from her, a larger sheet of paper than usual, drawn with wax crayons in bold, confident strokes. 3 people sat around a breakfast table, me, Owen, and Ivy. On the table were pancakes, a glass of milk, and a small bouquet of flowers. The door behind them was drawn wide open with sunlight streaming in. The drawing had a title, "No One Stands Outside the Door." I looked at it for a long time without saying a word. That evening, I took a photo of the drawing and sent it to Delilah's old number. No explanation attached. Just 3 words in a short, simple text message. "This is clarity." Not long after I heard from Wilma, Delilah had set her Facebook profile to private. All her old posts about her parenting style had disappeared. I didn't feel happy, nor did I feel sad. I just felt as if someone had finally cleaned out a room I had been locked in for far too long. Late that night, as I was folding laundry, Ivy stood in the doorway clutching a stuffed bear. "Grandma, is Mommy going to come find me?" I sat down, motioned for her to come over, and let her settle into my lap. I kissed the top of her head and said, "When you finish drawing a picture called Peace, she will come if she truly wants to." Closing, seeing Ivy didn't answer, just gave a small nod and snuggled her head into my shoulder. Outside the window, a fog was rolling in, but inside my heart there was a small spark of light, a light that didn't come from a lamp or a fireplace, but from an answer that no one needed to say out loud to be heard. Christmas came more slowly this year, or maybe it was just that I was living more slowly since that day. For the first time since everything happened, I pulled out the old box of string lights and checked every bulb. It was the same set of twinkling white lights I'd used at the old house, the only thing I'd brought with me, not knowing if I'd ever have a reason to hang them again. I draped the lights along the window frame on the wall across from the dining table, and then hung 2 small stockings, one for Ivy, one for Owen. We didn't have a fireplace in this apartment, but Ivy said, "As long as we hang them right, Santa will know where to stop." I smiled and nodded. On the 23rd, Ivy brought home a surprise gift from the dollar store near her school. "Close your eyes, Grandma," she urged, holding a crumpled paper bag. I covered my face with my hands, listening to the rustle of wrapping paper and the quick footsteps of a 6-year-old meticulously carrying out a secret ceremony. "Okay, open your eyes." In front of me was a tiny plastic Christmas tree, not even waist-high, standing crookedly in a red pot with peeling paint. Ivy held on to the edge of the table, her face beaming with pride. It's not tall, but it's big enough for the 3 of us to stand around it. I couldn't speak right away. I looked at her, her radiant face, the stray hairs sticking up from her winter hat, her eyes eagerly awaiting my reaction. I bent down and hugged her tightly. On Christmas Eve, I made gingerbread cookies again for the first time since the Christmas I was left outside the door. I kneaded the dough by hand using the old snowman-shaped cutter I'd bought when Owen was in preschool. Ivy cut the cookies and Owen watched the oven. The small kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon butter and the aroma of things that had once been broken, but were now being mended with time and patience. After dinner, Ivy ran to her room and came back with a thick notebook, its cover decorated with glitter and heart-shaped stickers. On the front she had written in a red marker, "My family." "I made this for you, Grandma," Ivy said. "Every page is something I want to remember forever." I turned the pages. The first page was a scene of the three of us at the grocery store. I was pushing the cart. Owen was wearing a backward baseball cap, and Ivy was sitting in the cart holding a box of cereal high in the air. The second page was the three of us reading on the sofa. I was hugging a pillow, Owen was holding a mug of tea, and Ivy had her legs propped up on my lap. The next page showed Owen fixing the kitchen sink, me standing with my hands on my hips, and Ivy holding up a toy hammer like a superhero. Each page was a piece of our life, not perfect, but real. The very last page of the book made me pause longer than all the rest. Ivy had drawn the old house, the house that had once locked me out. But this time, the scene was different. The three of us stood in front of the gate. I was holding Ivy's hand. Owen stood beside us, holding a gingerbread cookie. Behind us, the front door was wide open. A warm yellow light spilled out from inside. At the bottom, in messy blue marker, was a caption, "This time, the door is open." I held the drawing, my heart gently squeezed. It wasn't pain, but a tender pressure, like when you look at a scar that has finally healed. That night, after Ivy was asleep, I sat alone by the small tree, the twinkling lights casting shadows on the wall. Owen was in the kitchen washing dishes quietly, whistling a tune I didn't recognize. There was no snow, no guests, but everything was just right. I took out the old scrapbook, the first one Ivy had made for me, the one that had been rejected that year. I opened it again to the last page, the one where I had written. The last page was never the end. It was the first page of a new book. Now I knew. I had been right. The final line of the story, I had been erased from the picture. But it was Ivy who drew me back in. And this time, I wasn't on the outside anymore. If you're still here reading these last few lines, you've probably walked with me through this entire journey, from that Christmas morning to the moment Ivy drew me back into the picture. I'm not special. I'm no better than anyone else. I'm just a grandmother, a mother who stepped back many times, stayed silent many times, and believed for too long that silence is the way to keep the peace. But then I realized something that perhaps everyone my age takes too many years to understand. Sacrifice should never mean erasing yourself from the story. There were times I thought I was too old to demand fairness, too late to speak up, too late to start over. But Ivy, with just a few drawings and one innocent question, she reminded me, love is never too late if we are brave enough to stay. If you are a woman who has quietly left the family dinner table, been left out of the group calls, stayed silent when your daughter-in-law used formal distant pronouns instead of mom, or packed a gift only to quietly take it home with you, then I see you. I truly do. And I want you to know, you don't have to be angry to be acknowledged. You just have to refuse to disappear. Hold on to your own scrapbooks. They might be the meals you cook, the cards you've saved, or just a gentle look from a grandchild you once held in your arms. You have the right to be mentioned, the right to be remembered, the right to be loved, not because you are the unpaid help, but because you are the root of what stands tall today. And if someone like Delilah chooses to rewrite the story by cutting you out, remember this: you can rewrite it right back with your own presence. Ivy taught me something that isn't in any textbook. No one can draw you out of their life if you are brave enough to step back in with love, not hate. And what about you? Have you ever stood on the outside of a door like I did? Have you stayed silent for so long that you forgot the sound of your own voice? Or have you ever been drawn back into a final page that wasn't closed? I want to hear your story. You can leave a comment below. It doesn't have to be long or complete. It just has to be real. Because you never know what you share today might be exactly what a woman on the other side of the world needs to hear most.